Morgan Freeman was mistaken for a worker at an event. His response left everyone silent. The Grand Ambassador Hotel buzzed with anticipation as Hollywood's elite gathered for the annual Film Heritage Foundation Gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the sea of designer gowns and tailored suits. In a quiet corner of the bustling ballroom, Morgan Freeman stood alone, observing the crowd with his characteristic thoughtful expression. At 86, the legendary actor had the kind of presence that typically commanded immediate recognition. The distinguished silver hair, the gentle, knowing eyes, and of course, that iconic voice. Tonight, however, he'd arrived earlier than expected and chose to dress more casually than the other guests in simple black slacks and a comfortable navy button-down shirt. He'd left his bow tie and jacket with his assistant, who was running late. A young woman in her 30s, Sophia Martinez, newly appointed as the Foundation's Director of Development, moved efficiently through the room, checking last-minute details before the major donors arrived. She'd been in the position for just 3 weeks, relocating from Chicago for this career-making opportunity. The pressure to make tonight perfect weighed heavily on her shoulders. Noticing a tray of empty champagne glasses on a side table, Sophia frowned. The service staff had been specifically instructed to keep everything immaculate. She scanned the room for someone to address the issue and spotted Freeman standing nearby, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied a display of classic film photographs on the wall. "Excuse me," she called out, approaching him with the professional smile she'd perfected over years of donor relations. "Those glasses need to be cleared before the VIPs start arriving. Could you please take care of that right away?" There was a beat of silence as Morgan Freeman turned toward her, his eyebrows rising slightly. A few nearby guests who had recognized the actor froze in place, cocktails halfway to their lips, eyes widening in second-hand embarrassment. Sophia continued, checking her clipboard. "And once you've done that, we need more ice at the bar. The main entrance needs to be staffed as well." She looked up, finally meeting his gaze directly, and the words died in her throat as recognition slowly dawned on her face. "Oh my God," she whispered, color draining from her face as the clipboard slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. You're Morgan Freeman." The small cluster of guests nearby had grown silent, watching the uncomfortable scene unfold. A waiter who had been passing by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres stopped to stare. Someone whispered, "Did she just mistake Morgan Freeman for a server?" In that excruciating moment of realization, Sophia felt the foundation of her new career crumbling beneath her. How could she have mistaken one of Hollywood's most recognizable legends, a guest of honor at tonight's event, for a member of the wait staff? What would this mean for her reputation, for her job? The silence stretched painfully as everyone waited for Morgan Freeman's response. Would he be offended? Angry? Would he demand her dismissal on the spot? Freeman looked down at the tray of empty glasses, then back at the mortified young woman. His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Well," he said, his deep baritone voice instantly recognizable to everyone in earshot, "I suppose I could take care of those glasses for you." And then he did something no one expected. Morgan Freeman picked up the tray of empty champagne glasses with the casual ease of someone who might have indeed worked service jobs in his youth. Before Sophia could stammer out an apology, he winked at her and began walking toward the kitchen area. "Mr. Freeman, please, I'm so sorry," Sophia finally managed, hurrying after him as whispers erupted in their wake. Freeman paused and turned back toward her. "It's Morgan, please. And it's quite all right. I wasn't doing anything important anyway, just admiring those photographs." His voice carried just enough to be heard by the nearest onlookers, some of whom were now discreetly pulling out their phones. "But you're a guest of honor," Sophia protested, her face still burning with embarrassment. "You're receiving the Lifetime Achievement Award tonight. I can't believe I didn't recognize you." "Honestly, it's refreshing," Freeman replied with genuine warmth. "Do you know how exhausting it is to be recognized everywhere you go?" He set the tray down on a nearby table and gestured for a passing waiter to take it. "Though I am curious, what made you think I worked here?" Sophia glanced down at her hands, wishing the elegant marble floor would open up and swallow her whole. "I just saw someone standing quietly, observing everything. You seemed so attentive to the room. That's what our best staff members do." She looked up at him hesitantly. "And you weren't dressed like the other celebrities." Freeman chuckled, a rich sound that seemed to vibrate through the air. "Well, that's because most celebrities take 2 hours to dress for these things. I just throw on something comfortable and show up." From across the room, Paul Hannigan, the Foundation's board president, noticed the interaction and made his way over, alarm evident on his face as he recognized the potential PR disaster unfolding. "Morgan, I see you've met our new director of development," Paul said, placing a protective hand on Sophia's shoulder. "I hope she's been taking good care of you." His eyes darted nervously between them. "Actually," Freeman replied, his expression unreadable, "she was just putting me to work. Apparently I give off strong service staff energy tonight." Paul's face went pale. What? Sophia, did you—" "It was an honest mistake," Freeman interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. "And frankly, I find it rather humbling." Just then, a photographer approached, asking for a photo of Morgan Freeman with the Foundation leadership. As flashbulbs popped, Sophia tried to step out of the frame, but Freeman casually put a hand on her elbow, keeping her in place beside him. "Stay," he said quietly. "This will make a much better story later." As the small crowd around them dispersed, Freeman leaned in closer to Sophia. "You know, I wasn't always Morgan Freeman Academy Award winner. My first jobs in New York included working as a clerk and even a mechanic. I wasn't discovered until much later in life." Sophia looked at him with surprise. "Really? I didn't know that." "Many don't," he said thoughtfully. "People see the finished product and forget the journey that came before. Perhaps that's why I wasn't offended by your mistake. It reminded me of who I was before all this." He gestured vaguely at the opulent surroundings. Across the room, a commotion erupted as several A-list actors made their entrance, drawing attention away from them. Sophia took the opportunity to speak more candidly. "Mr. Freeman, Morgan, I can't express how mortified I am. This is my first major event in this position and Let me ask you something," Freeman interrupted gently. "How many other celebrities have you approached tonight, thinking they were staff members?" "None, of course," she replied, confused by the question. "And will you likely make this same mistake again?" "Definitely not," Sophia said, managing a small smile despite herself. "Then there's no harm done. In fact," he added, his eyes twinkling with mischief, "I find myself suddenly very interested in your foundation's work, much more so than I was 10 minutes ago." Paul Hannigan, who had been hovering anxiously nearby, overheard this last exchange and visibly relaxed. Perhaps this potential disaster could be salvaged after all. "Morgan, would you like to see the historical film restoration project we're featuring tonight?" Paul asked, seizing the opportunity. "Sophia is actually the one who secured the funding for it. She's quite brilliant when she's not mistaking our honored guests for the waitstaff." His attempt at humor fell awkwardly flat. Freeman, however, nodded with genuine interest. "I'd appreciate that very much. Lead the way, Sophia." As they walked toward the exhibition area, Sophia found her professional composure returning, her passion for the Foundation's work overtaking her embarrassment. She began explaining the painstaking process of restoring century-old film reels, the historical significance of the footage they'd recovered, and the educational programs they were developing. Freeman listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his deep knowledge of film history. Other guests, noticing the legendary actor's evident interest, began to gather around them, drawn into Sophia's enthusiastic explanations. "You see," Freeman commented to the growing crowd, "this is why I'm here tonight. Not for the champagne or the recognition, but for this, the preservation of our cultural heritage." He gestured toward the displays Sophia had been describing. "We're fortunate to have passionate advocates like Ms. Martinez leading these efforts." Several wealthy donors in the group nodded in agreement, looking at Sophia with newfound respect. What had begun as a mortifying mistake was transforming through Freeman's gracious handling into an unexpected spotlight on the Foundation's work. As the formal program was about to begin, Freeman was called away for the final preparations before his award presentation. He shook Sophia's hand warmly. "Thank you for the tour," he said, his voice dropping to a confidential tone, "and for the reminder of what it feels like to be seen as just another person in the room. It's actually quite liberating." Before Sophia could respond, one of the event coordinators approached with urgency. "Mr. Freeman, there's been a small issue with the teleprompter for your acceptance speech. Would you mind coming to check it before the presentation begins?" Freeman nodded, then turned back to Sophia with a twinkle in his eye. "Duty calls. But I have a feeling we'll talk again before the night is over." As he walked away, Sophia noticed several board members and major donors looking at her with curious expressions. The story of her mistake, and Freeman's remarkable response, had clearly begun circulating through the event. But rather than the career-ending disaster she had feared, The energy felt different. People seemed impressed. She didn't have long to wonder about this shift. The lights dimmed, signaling guests to take their seats for the program, and Sophia moved to find her assigned table near the back of the room. To her surprise, Paul Hannigan intercepted her. "Change of plans," he said, guiding her toward the front of the ballroom. "You'll be sitting at the head table tonight." "The head table? But that's for—" "Morgan Freeman requested it," Paul said simply. "And when Morgan Freeman makes a request at an event honoring Morgan Freeman, we accommodate it." As they approached the prominent table directly in front of the stage, Sophia noticed that her name card had indeed been placed next to an empty seat with Morgan Freeman printed in elegant calligraphy. She sat down, still processing the unexpected turn of events, as the foundation president took the stage to begin the evening's program. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Film Heritage Foundation's annual gala." The spotlight illuminated the stage as the foundation president continued his welcome address. Sophia tried to focus on his words, but her thoughts kept returning to the empty chair beside her. What was Morgan Freeman planning? Was this seating arrangement his way of publicly forgiving her mistake, or did he have something else in mind? When the time came for Freeman's award presentation, a montage of his most iconic film moments played on the large screens flanking the stage. From Driving Miss Daisy, to The Shawshank Redemption, $1 Million Baby, to Invictus, his extraordinary range and depth as an actor unfolded before the captivated audience. The narrator spoke of Freeman's humble beginnings, his years of struggle before success, and his commitment to storytelling that revealed the truth of the human condition. As the montage concluded, the audience rose in a standing ovation before Freeman even took the stage. When he finally stepped into the spotlight, he carried himself with the quiet dignity that had become his trademark. He accepted the Crystal Award with both hands, studying it for a moment before approaching the microphone. "Thank you," he began, his distinctive voice silencing the room instantly. "You know, I've been fortunate enough to receive quite a few of these over the years." He gestured with the award. "Each one represents stories I've had the privilege to tell. But tonight, I want to talk about the stories we don't tell enough." Freeman paused, his eyes scanning the audience before surprisingly settling on Sophia. "Earlier this evening, something happened that many would consider embarrassing. A dedicated young professional mistook me for a member of the waitstaff." A murmur rippled through the audience. Sophia felt heat rising to her face again, as hundreds of eyes turned in her direction. "Her name is Sophia Martinez," Freeman continued, "and she's sitting right there." He pointed directly to her table. "Stand up, Sophia, would you please?" Feeling as though she were moving through a dream, Sophia rose shakily to her feet. The spotlight that had been on Freeman widened to include her. "Now many people would expect me to be offended by such a mistake," Freeman said, his voice taking on the narrative quality that had narrated everything from penguin migrations to the history of the universe. "And perhaps, at some points in my career, I might have been. But tonight it struck me as profoundly important." He set the award down on the podium and stepped away from the microphone, moving to the edge of the stage closer to where Sophia stood. "You see, Sophia didn't make this mistake because she doesn't know who Morgan Freeman is. She made it because in that moment, she saw a person first and a celebrity second. And in an industry that too often conflates a person's value with their fame or wealth, that is remarkably refreshing." The audience was completely silent now, hanging on his every word. "I started my life as the son of a barber. I worked as a mechanic and a clerk before I ever stood in front of a camera. And while I'm deeply grateful for the recognition my work has received, I never want to forget that beneath all the accolades, I'm still just a man trying to do good work." Freeman's eyes, warm and direct, held Sophia's gaze. "So thank you, Sophia, for that moment of humility. For reminding me, and everyone in this room, that how we treat people when the spotlight isn't on us reveals far more about our character than how we behave when accepting awards." The audience erupted in applause. Several people at nearby tables reached over to pat Sophia's shoulder or squeeze her hand. Overwhelmed, she managed a small nod of acknowledgement to Freeman before sinking back into her seat, her mind reeling from this unexpected turn of events. Freeman returned to the microphone as the applause quieted. "Which brings me to the real reason we're here tonight. The Film Heritage Foundation does extraordinary work preserving not just old movies, but our collective cultural memory. These aren't just films they're saving. They're our stories, how we saw ourselves, how we understood our world, what made us laugh and cry across generations." He picked up his award again. "This recognition means a great deal to me, but I'd like to use this moment to announce something. In honor of this foundation's work, and inspired by my conversation with Sophia about their educational initiatives, I'm establishing the Freeman Future Storytellers Grant. This program will provide funding for young filmmakers from underrepresented communities to tell stories that might otherwise go untold. Gasps and whispers swept through the ballroom. Paul Hannigan, seated at another table, looked as though he might faint from joy. I'm committing $1 million to start this fund, Freeman continued, with the hope that others in this room might join me in supporting both this new initiative and the Foundation's ongoing preservation efforts. The applause was thunderous. Several wealthy donors were already pulling out checkbooks or taking notes on their phones. What had begun as a potentially awkward moment of mistaken identity had transformed into an unprecedented fundraising opportunity for the Foundation. As Freeman concluded his speech and returned to his seat beside Sophia, the room buzzed with excitement. He leaned toward her, speaking quietly so only she could hear. "I hope you don't mind that I used our little moment to make a point," he said. "Mind?" Sophia replied, still struggling to process everything that had happened. "You just turned the most embarrassing moment of my career into this." She gestured at the energized room. "I don't know how to thank you." Freeman smiled. "No need. But there is something I'd like to discuss with you about this new grant program. I'm serious about it, and I'd like your input on how it should be structured." Before Sophia could respond, they were interrupted by a constant stream of guests stopping by their table, some to congratulate Freeman, others to pledge additional support for his new initiative, and many to introduce themselves to Sophia, suddenly the center of attention for entirely different reasons than she had feared. During a brief lull between well-wishers, Freeman turned to her again. "Tell me," he said, his expression curious, "how did you end up in this line of work? Preserving film history seems like a specific passion." The personal question, asked with genuine interest, caught Sophia off guard. After spending the evening focused on her professional embarrassment and then unexpected redemption, the simple human connection in his inquiry was disarming. "My grandfather," she answered, a smile softening her features. "He owned a small theater in Chicago that showed classic films on weekends. I grew up watching everything from Chaplin to Kurosawa in that old theater. When he passed away, the building was sold to developers. All those memories, that cultural touchstone for our community, gone overnight." Freeman nodded, understanding in his eyes. "So you're making sure other memories don't disappear the same way." "Exactly," Sophia said, surprised and touched by how quickly he grasped the emotional core of her work. "Films don't just entertain us, they help us understand who we were and who we might become. When we lose them, we lose pieces of our shared history." "That's precisely the kind of perspective I want involved in this grant program," Freeman said decisively. "People who understand the power of storytelling on a personal level." Their conversation was interrupted again, this time by Paul Hannigan, who couldn't contain his excitement any longer. "Morgan, this is extraordinary. We've already received pledges for another $2 million to match your donation. This could be the largest single fundraising night in the Foundation's history." Freeman accepted the news with a modest nod. "I'm glad to hear it, Paul, and I'd like Sophia to take point on developing the framework for the grant program. Her perspective will be valuable." Paul blinked in surprise, then quickly recovered. Of course. Sophia is one of our most innovative team members." He beamed at her with newfound appreciation, the earlier mishap apparently forgotten in light of this unexpected development. As the formal program concluded and guests began mingling again, Freeman leaned close to Sophia one last time. "Sometimes our most uncomfortable moments lead to our greatest opportunities," he said quietly, "but only if we have the courage to remain present through the discomfort." With that philosophical observation, he excused himself to greet some longtime industry colleagues, leaving Sophia to reflect on the extraordinary chain of events her mistake had set in motion. As she watched him move through the crowd with genuine warmth and attention for everyone he encountered, from celebrities to service staff, she understood something profound about true greatness. It wasn't about being recognized or treated with deference. It was about how you recognized and treated others, especially when no one was watching. And that lesson, she realized, was worth far more than any momentary embarrassment. 3 months later, Sophia stood in the newly renovated classroom of the South Central Community Arts Center, watching as 20 teenagers adjusted their cameras under the guidance of an experienced cinematographer. Sunlight streamed through windows that had been boarded up for years before the Freeman Future Storytellers Grant had funded the center's revival. The program had expanded far beyond her initial vision. What began as a simple film education initiative had evolved into a comprehensive storytelling academy that included filmmaking, screenplay writing, editing, and even traditional oral storytelling traditions from the students' diverse cultural backgrounds. "They're getting better every week," said a familiar voice behind her. Sophia turned to find Morgan Freeman observing the class, his eyes bright with interest. Though he had officially handed off the program's operations to the foundation, he made regular unannounced visits to check on its progress. "Mr. Freeman," she greeted him, no longer flustered in his presence after months of collaboration. "I didn't know you were coming today." "Morgan," he corrected gently, as he had done every time they'd met since the gala. "And I wanted to see their documentary projects. From what I hear, they're tackling some powerful subjects." Sophia nodded, leading him toward a small viewing room where students' works in progress were being reviewed. "They're telling stories no one else is telling. The closing of the community hospital, the local elders who preserved cultural traditions through segregation, the environmental impact of the factory at the edge of their neighborhood. Real stories," Freeman observed. "Not the Hollywood version." "Exactly. And they're connecting with film archives to incorporate historical footage, creating this beautiful dialogue between past and present." As they entered the viewing room, the students inside immediately recognized Freeman, but their reaction was notably different from what might have occurred before the program. Rather than asking for selfies or autographs, they eagerly showed him their projects, seeking his feedback on specific storytelling techniques. He settled in among them naturally, asking questions that demonstrated genuine interest in their perspectives. When one young filmmaker shared her documentary about her grandmother's immigration journey, Freeman listened with such focused attention that the girl grew increasingly confident in her presentation. "You've found the emotional core of the story," he told her when she finished. "That's something many filmmakers with decades of experience still struggle to do." The girl beamed with pride. "Ms. Martinez taught us to start with the why this story matters to us personally, before figuring out the how of telling it." Freeman glanced at Sophia with approval. "Excellent advice." After spending over an hour with the students, Freeman and Sophia stepped out into the center's courtyard, which had been transformed from a neglected concrete space into a vibrant outdoor classroom with a green screen wall and seating area. "You've done remarkable work here," he said. "This program has already exceeded what I imagined when I announced it that night." Sophia shook her head. "None of this would have happened if you hadn't turned my mistake into an opportunity." "Ah, but that's where you're wrong," Freeman countered. "The opportunity was always there, in your passion, in your understanding of why these stories matter. All I did was shine a light on it." He paused, looking back at the classroom where the students were packing up their equipment. "You know, I've been thinking about that night a lot recently." "The night I mistook you for a waiter?" Sophia asked, wincing slightly at the memory despite everything positive that had come from it. "Yes," Freeman said, his expression thoughtful. "There was something profound in that moment that I've been trying to articulate. Something about visibility and invisibility." Sophia waited, sensing he was working through an important idea. "When you thought I was staff, you actually saw me differently than most people do. Not as Morgan Freeman actor, but simply as a person in the room who might help with a task." He looked at her directly. "Do you know how rare that is for someone like me? To be seen as just another human being rather than an icon or a celebrity?" Sophia considered this perspective, which had never occurred to her. "I never thought about it that way. Most people don't," he said gently. "But the students in this program, they're often in the opposite position. They're too frequently invisible. Their stories deemed unimportant by mainstream media. What you're doing here is teaching them how to make themselves and their communities visible on their own terms." He gestured toward the classroom. "And that's why I came today. I want to expand the program." "Expand it?" Sophia asked, surprised. Freeman nodded. "I've been talking with several colleagues in the industry who are interested in creating similar programs in other cities. We'd like to establish a national network, with this center as the flagship model." Sophia felt a rush of excitement at the possibilities. "That would be incredible. We've already had to turn away applicants because we don't have the capacity." "I thought as much," Freeman said. "And we'd like you to oversee the expansion. The foundation has agreed to create a new position, National Director of the Freeman Storytellers Network." Sophia stared at him in disbelief. "Me? But I've only been with the foundation for long enough to take a simple film preservation program and transform it into something that's changing lives," Freeman interrupted. "And isn't that what great storytelling is supposed to do?" Before she could respond, they were interrupted by one of the students, a quiet boy who had rarely spoken during Freeman's previous visits. "Excuse me, Mr. Freeman, Ms. Martinez," he said hesitantly. "We wanted to show you something before you leave." They followed him back to the classroom, where the students had rearranged chairs into a semicircle facing a projection screen. As Sophia and Freeman took the offered seats, the lights dimmed. On screen appeared the title, Seeing and Being Seen, The Story of the Freeman. Future Storytellers Grant. What followed was a meticulously crafted short documentary about the program's creation, featuring interviews with Foundation staff, students, and community members. The students had even incorporated news coverage from the night of the gala, including clips of Freeman's speech. But the most surprising element was footage of Sophia herself, filmed without her knowledge during classes and mentoring sessions, capturing her passionate interactions with the students and her emotional reactions to their work. Through the students' eyes, she saw herself transformed, not the embarrassed Foundation employee from the gala, but a dedicated advocate who had helped channel Freeman's initial investment into a program that was already changing lives. The final segment of the documentary featured the students speaking directly to the camera, each sharing how the program had affected them. "Before this, I thought my neighborhood stories didn't matter," said one girl. "I never knew my grandmother's journey was something worth documenting," added another. "I used to think being a filmmaker meant leaving this community behind," a boy admitted. "Now I know I can tell our stories from the inside." The film concluded with a simple message: "Thank you for seeing us." As the lights came up, Sophia realized she was crying. Freeman, too, seemed moved, blinking rapidly before standing to address the students. "In my career," he said, his voice carrying its characteristic gravitas, "I've had the privilege of telling many stories, but watching you discover your own stories, and your power in telling them, has been far more meaningful than any role I've ever played." He turned to include Sophia in his gaze. "This program began because someone saw a person, not a celebrity. It continues because these young filmmakers are learning to see their own communities and themselves with new eyes." Later, as they left the center together, Freeman asked Sophia if she would accept the new position overseeing the program's national expansion. "There's still a part of me that can't believe all of this started because of my mistake," she admitted. Freeman shook his head, a gentle smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "No, it started because of how you responded to your mistake, with grace and authenticity, and because you were passionate enough about your work that you caught my interest even in the midst of your embarrassment." He paused at the entrance to the center, looking back at the building now filled with young people finding their voices. "You know, in all my years as an actor, I've learned that the most powerful moments on screen often come from what appears to be a mistake, when something unexpected happens, and the actor stays present enough to incorporate it into the scene rather than calling for a reshoot." Sophia considered this insight. "So you're saying good things can come from mistakes if we stay present through them?" "I'm saying," Freeman replied, his voice taking on the sagacious quality that had narrated humanity's greatest questions, "that there are no mistakes, only opportunities for authenticity. What matters is whether we have the courage to remain true to ourselves when life doesn't follow the script we expected." As they parted ways, Sophia looked back at the community center, at the vibrant mural the students had painted on its exterior wall, depicting a diverse group of young filmmakers capturing their neighborhood's stories. Above them, in flowing script integrated into the design, were words from Freeman's speech the night of the gala. "Every person has a story worth telling. Every community has a history worth preserving." What had begun with a moment of mistaken identity had transformed into a movement of recognition, of seeing and being seen, that would continue to ripple outward, changing lives far beyond what either of them had imagined possible on that embarrassing night 3 months earlier. And in that transformation lay the true power of storytelling, not merely to entertain, but to illuminate the profound connections that exist beneath the surface of everyday encounters, waiting only for someone to notice them and speak them into being.